The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling city street, painting the scene in a mixture of warm gold and cool gray. People hurried past, absorbed in their own worlds, a symphony of footsteps and car horns filling the air. David, a black man in his late 30s, walked at a steady pace, his shoulders relaxed, a quiet contentment settling over him after a productive day at work. He was humming softly to himself, lost in thought, as he navigated the crowded sidewalk. He wasn't paying close attention to the people around him, focused instead on the rhythm of his steps and the pleasant melody playing in his head. He was almost at the corner, ready to cross the street, when he felt a sudden, jarring shove from behind. He stumbled forward, his balance momentarily lost, his heart leaping into his throat. He turned, expecting an apology, perhaps a hurried explanation from someone caught up in the rush of the city. Instead, he found himself facing Robert, a white man several years his senior, his face contorted in a mask of anger and barely concealed hatred. Robert's eyes, narrowed and intense, were fixed on David with a chilling intensity. He stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. "Watch where you're going, you," Robert sputtered, his voice thick with rage, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy in the air. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, the weight of unspoken prejudices. David, initially startled, quickly regained his composure. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he sensed the undercurrent of something far more sinister than a simple accidental bump. "I'm sorry," David said calmly, his voice even and measured, a stark contrast to Robert's volatile outburst. He tried to assess the situation, hoping to de-escalate the tension. "I didn't see you." He offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of apology. Robert's response was far from conciliatory. He took a step closer, his face inches from David's, his breath hot and rancid on David's skin. The words that followed were laced with venom, dripping with the poison of racial hatred. They were the kind of words that cut deeper than any physical blow, leaving scars that festered long after the bruises healed. "Don't play innocent with me, boy," Robert snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You think you could just walk wherever you want, blocking the sidewalk like you own the place? This is my city, and people like you," he trailed off, his eyes blazing with contempt. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air, a suffocating cloud of prejudice. David felt a chill run down his spine. He had encountered racism before, the subtle slights, the microaggressions, the casual disregard. But this was different. This was raw, unfiltered hatred, unleashed in a public space, for all to see. He tried again to de-escalate, to reason with the man. "Sir, I really didn't mean to," he began, but his words were cut short by a sudden, violent blow. Robert's fist connected with David's jaw, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his head. He staggered back, his vision blurring, his ears ringing. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. He tasted blood, the metallic tang filling his mouth. Before he could react, another blow landed, this time on his ribs, the force of it knocking the air from his lungs. He crumpled to the ground, his body hitting the hard pavement with a jarring thud. He felt a searing pain shoot through his side, a sharp, agonizing stab. Robert stood over him, his face contorted in a triumphant sneer, his eyes gleaming with a savage satisfaction. He loosed a torrent of racial slurs, each word a venomous dart aimed at David's heart. He then turned and strode away, leaving David lying on the ground, bruised, bloodied, and utterly alone. The sounds of the city, once a comforting hum, now seemed to mock his vulnerability. The afternoon sun, once warm and inviting, now felt cold and indifferent. The silence that followed Robert's departure was deafening. The cacophony of the city, which had moments before been a backdrop to the assault, now seemed to recede, leaving behind an oppressive stillness. David lay on the ground, the rough texture of the pavement pressing against his cheek. He tasted blood, a coppery tang mingling with the dust and grime of the city street. His ribs ached, a dull, throbbing pain radiating outwards from the point of impact. His jaw throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that made it difficult to swallow. He took a deep breath, trying to ignore the pain, focusing instead on regaining his composure. He could feel the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a wave of exhaustion and a chilling sense of vulnerability. He had been attacked, brutally and without provocation, simply because of the color of his skin. The realization settled over him like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. He slowly pushed himself up, his hands braced against the ground, his body trembling with a mixture of pain and anger. He felt a strange detachment, a calm that seemed almost surreal given the violence he had just endured. It was as if he had stepped outside of himself, observing the events as if they were happening to someone else. He looked around, his gaze sweeping across the street. The people who had witnessed the assault seemed to have vanished, absorbed back into the city's relentless flow. No one offered help. No one intervened. They had simply looked away, their eyes averted, their minds seemingly closed to the brutality that had unfolded before them. He stood, swaying slightly, his legs unsteady. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, but he fought it back, determined to remain strong. He needed to get himself to safety, to somewhere he could assess his injuries and decide what to do next. He adjusted his clothes, brushing off the dust and grime. He checked himself for any visible injuries, wincing as he touched his jaw and ribs. He felt a trickle of blood running down his cheek, a crimson stain against the pale skin. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of blood on his already soiled shirt. He started walking, his pace slow and deliberate. He avoided eye contact with the passers-by, their faces a blur of indifference. He felt a deep sense of isolation, a profound loneliness that was amplified by the silence of those who had witnessed his suffering. He reached the corner, pausing briefly to catch his breath. He looked back at the spot where he had been attacked, a small, insignificant patch of sidewalk in a vast and indifferent city. He felt a surge of anger, a righteous fury that threatened to consume him. But he suppressed it, replacing it with a quiet determination. He wouldn't let Robert win. He wouldn't let this act of violence define him. He would not allow this hatred to break him. He would move on. He would heal. And he would continue to live his life with dignity and grace. He continued walking, his steps firm and purposeful. He had a long road ahead, but he was determined to walk it with his head held high. He would not be deterred. He would not be silenced. He would not be broken. He would simply move on, leaving the violence and the hatred behind him, carrying with him only the strength of his spirit and the unwavering belief in his own resilience. The city, with its indifferent crowds and its relentless pace, would not defeat him. He would persevere. He would endure. He would overcome. The city lights twinkled, a distant, shimmering constellation against the deepening twilight. Hours had passed since the assault, the adrenaline long since faded, leaving behind a dull ache in David's body and a simmering anger in his heart. He had managed to get home, clean his wounds, and try to find some semblance of peace. The incident, however, clung to him like a shadow, a persistent reminder of the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. Robert, meanwhile, was driving home, his mind still buzzing with the adrenaline of his attack on David. He replayed the scene in his head, savoring the feeling of power, the satisfaction of inflicting pain. He justified his actions, blaming David for obstructing his path, for daring to exist in the space he felt was rightfully his. The racial slurs he had hurled echoed in his mind, not as words of hate, but as a declaration of dominance. He drove recklessly, his anger fueling his speed. He weaved through traffic, ignoring the honking horns and flashing lights. He felt invincible, untouchable. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as he sped down the highway, a blur of motion against the darkening sky. He was lost in his own world, oblivious to the dangers that lurked around him. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a dark ribbon unwinding into the night. He was humming along to the radio, the music a discordant counterpoint to the turmoil within him. He felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a reckless abandon that bordered on madness. Then it happened, a sudden, blinding flash of headlights, a screech of tires, a deafening crash. The world exploded in a cacophony of shattering glass and twisting metal. Robert's car spun violently, tumbling end over end before coming to a jarring halt, a mangled wreck of twisted steel and broken glass. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning rubber and the sickening crunch of metal. The impact threw Robert against his seatbelt, his body jolting violently. He felt a sharp, searing pain shoot through his chest, a crushing weight pressing down on his lungs. He gasped for air, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The world swam before his eyes, a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. He tried to move, to reach for something, anything, but his body refused to cooperate. A wave of nausea washed over him, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness. The silence that followed the crash was profound, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. The city lights, once a blur of motion, now seemed distant and unreal. The music on the radio, once a source of exhilaration, was now a faint, distorted whisper. He lay trapped in the wreckage of his car, his body battered and broken, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. The anger that had fueled his reckless driving had vanished, replaced by a chilling fear. The invincibility he had felt moments before had been shattered, replaced by a crushing sense of vulnerability. The world, once his to command, now seemed to be closing in on him, threatening to consume him. He was alone, trapped in the darkness, his body screaming in pain, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaos. The consequences of his actions, so readily dismissed just hours before, had finally caught up with him. The city, once a stage for his arrogance, had become his prison. The wail of sirens sliced through the night, a desperate cry for help echoing through the city streets. Emergency vehicles converged on the scene of the accident, their flashing lights illuminating the wreckage of Robert's car. Paramedics worked swiftly and efficiently, their movements precise and practiced. They carefully extricated Robert from the mangled remains of his vehicle, his body limp and unresponsive. He was placed on a stretcher, his breathing shallow and labored. His face was pale, his lips blue, his pulse weak and thready. The paramedics monitored his vital signs, their expressions grim. His condition was precarious, his injuries severe. They rushed him to the nearest hospital, the flashing lights of the ambulance cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The emergency room was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic ballet of doctors, nurses, and technicians. The air hummed with the low thrum of medical equipment, the rhythmic beep of heart monitors, the hushed whispers of concerned professionals. Robert was wheeled into a trauma bay, a team of medical personnel swarming around him, their movements efficient and coordinated. His clothes were cut away, revealing the extent of his injuries. He had multiple fractures, his ribs were broken, and his chest was severely bruised. His breathing was labored, his oxygen saturation dangerously low. The doctors worked quickly, inserting in 4-line, attaching him to a ventilator, and monitoring his vital signs. His blood pressure plummeted, his heart rate spiking erratically. The team battled to stabilize him, their efforts a desperate race against time. They administered fluids, medications, and blood transfusions. They performed a series of tests, their faces etched with concern. His condition remained critical, his survival hanging in the balance. The atmosphere in the trauma bay was thick with tension, the silence punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the hushed whispers of the medical team. The doctors conferred, their voices low and serious. They discussed his injuries, his prognosis, the options available. The situation was grave, his chances of survival uncertain. They continued to work tirelessly, their skill and dedication a testament to their commitment to saving lives. The hours that followed were a blur of activity, a relentless cycle of monitoring, administering medication, and performing procedures. The medical team worked with unwavering precision, their expertise and experience on full display. They were a well-oiled machine, each member playing their part in the fight to save Robert's life. The night wore on, the tension in the emergency room palpable. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a constant reminder of Robert's precarious condition. The medical team remained vigilant, their eyes constantly scanning the monitors, their hands constantly adjusting the equipment. They were determined to do everything in their power to save him, their dedication unwavering despite the gravity of the situation. The fight for Robert's life continued, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unwavering commitment of those who dedicate their lives to healing. The outcome remained uncertain, hanging precariously in the balance. The world slowly came back into focus, a blurry haze giving way to a sharp, almost painful clarity. Robert's eyes fluttered open, his vision swimming with a disorienting mix of light and shadow. He felt a throbbing pain in his head, a dull ache in his chest, and a general sense of weakness that permeated his entire body. He tried to move, but his body refused to cooperate, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He was lying in a bed, surrounded by the sterile white walls of a hospital room. He was hooked up to a multitude of machines, their rhythmic beeping a constant, almost hypnotic drone. For lines snaked from his arms, tubes snaked from his nostrils. Monitors displayed his vital signs, a constant stream of numbers and graphs that he couldn't quite comprehend. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else, something subtly sweet and medicinal. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, his mind slowly piecing together the fragments of his memory. The reckless driving, the blinding headlights, the sickening crash. The images flickered through his mind, a chaotic sequence of events leading to this moment of disorientation and pain. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on the faces of the medical personnel surrounding him. They were a blur of white coats and concerned expressions, their movements precise and efficient. He saw a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, adjusting the 4-line in his arm. He saw a man with a stern face and a focused gaze, checking his blood pressure. They were all professionals, their demeanor calm and reassuring. Then he saw him. Standing at the head of the bed, overseeing the medical team, was David. The same black man Robert had assaulted hours earlier. The same man he had shoved to the ground. The same man he had punched and kicked. The same man he had subjected to a torrent of racial slurs. David was now dressed in a crisp white doctor's coat, his face impassive, his gaze steady and unwavering. He was leading the medical team, directing their efforts, ensuring his care. A wave of shock washed over Robert, a disorienting mixture of surprise, disbelief, and a growing sense of unease. He stared at David, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of the man he had brutally attacked with the image of the doctor who was now saving his life. The irony was staggering, the juxtaposition jarring. David's presence was both unexpected and unsettling. It was a stark reminder of his actions, a confrontation he hadn't anticipated, a reckoning he hadn't prepared for. The hatred that had fueled his attack was now confronted by the very person he had targeted, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. The man he had sought to demean was now in a position of power, his life literally in David's hands. Robert's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He felt a mixture of fear and guilt, a sense of dread that settled over him like a heavy cloak. The man he had assaulted, the man he had dehumanized, was now the one responsible for his very survival. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and regret. He was trapped, not just in a hospital bed, but in the inescapable consequences of his own hateful actions. The man he had tried to destroy was now the one holding his life in his hands. The irony was almost unbearable. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask a question, to offer an apology, but no words came out. He was speechless, his mind reeling from the shock of the encounter, the weight of his actions pressing down on him with a suffocating force. He was at the mercy of the man he had tried to harm, his fate hanging precariously in the balance. The man who had been the target of his hate was now the one holding his life in his hands. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and regret. David, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil raging within Robert, continued to oversee Robert's care with unwavering professionalism. He gave instructions to the nurses and other medical staff in a calm, clear voice, his demeanor cool and collected. He examined Robert's charts, his gaze focused and intent. He checked his vital signs, his touch gentle yet precise. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't show a flicker of recognition or resentment. He treated Robert as he would any other patient, his actions guided solely by his medical expertise and his unwavering commitment to his profession. He adjusted Robert's foreline, his movements fluid and practiced. He checked the settings on the ventilator, ensuring that Robert was receiving the proper level of oxygen. He ordered blood tests, X-rays, and other diagnostic procedures, his instructions clear and concise. He didn't speak to Robert directly, focusing instead on the tasks at hand, his attention unwavering. The other medical personnel followed his lead, their movements mirroring his calm efficiency. They worked as a team, their efforts seamless and coordinated. They were focused on Robert's well-being, their concern evident in their every action. They treated him with the same level of care and attention they would give any other patient, regardless of their personal feelings or the circumstances surrounding his injuries. David's professionalism was striking, a stark contrast to the raw emotion that had fueled Robert's attack. It was a testament to his character, his commitment to his profession, and his unwavering belief in the sanctity of human life. He didn't allow his personal feelings to interfere with his medical judgment, his actions guided solely by his expertise and his dedication to his oath. He continued to monitor Robert's condition, his gaze constantly scanning the monitors, his hands constantly adjusting the equipment. He noted the subtle changes in Robert's vital signs, interpreting the data with precision and expertise. He made adjustments to Robert's treatment plan as needed, his decisions informed by his medical knowledge and his years of experience. His calm demeanor was infectious, spreading through the medical team. They worked with a quiet efficiency, their movements precise and purposeful. They were focused on the task at hand, their attention unwavering. They were a team, united in their commitment to saving Robert's life, their efforts a testament to their dedication and skill. David's actions were a powerful statement, a silent rebuke of Robert's hatred. It was a demonstration of the power of compassion, the ability to rise above personal animosity and focus on the well-being of another human being. It was a testament to the healing power of professionalism, the ability to transcend prejudice and focus on the task at hand, regardless of personal feelings or past transgressions. His actions spoke volumes, a powerful message of forgiveness and understanding delivered not through words, but through actions. His unwavering professionalism was a beacon of hope in the midst of darkness, a testament to the enduring power of humanity. As the hours passed and Robert's condition slowly stabilized, David's calm efficiency remained unwavering. He was a pillar of strength, a symbol of hope in the face of adversity. His actions were a powerful testament to the healing power of professionalism and the unwavering commitment to the sanctity of human life. He was a doctor, and his job was to save lives, regardless of the circumstances. As the immediate crisis subsided and Robert's condition stabilized, a strange clarity began to dawn. The pain remained, a dull throb that served as a constant reminder of his ordeal. But the haze of shock and adrenaline started to lift, allowing a more coherent stream of thought to emerge. He lay in the sterile white hospital bed, the rhythmic beeping of machines a muted soundtrack to his slowly returning awareness. He thought about the events of the day, the escalating anger, the irrational violence, the brutal assault. The images flickered through his mind. David's calm demeanor, his unexpected shove, his own uncontrolled rage, the sickening thud of fists against flesh, the torrent of hateful words. He recalled the satisfaction he'd felt, the sense of power he'd briefly experienced. Now, that satisfaction felt hollow, a grotesque parody of triumph. He looked around the room, his gaze settling on David again. The doctor was still there, overseeing his care with the same unwavering professionalism. He was still the same black man Robert had attacked, yet he was also the one responsible for Robert's survival. The irony was a heavy weight on Robert's chest, almost as oppressive as the physical pain. The events of the day began to coalesce in his mind, forming a disturbingly clear picture. He had attacked David, a complete stranger, fueled by prejudice and a misplaced sense of entitlement. He had acted on impulse, allowing his hatred to override his reason. He had dehumanized David, reducing him to a stereotype, a symbol of everything Robert feared and despised. But David, in turn, had shown him a different kind of humanity, a compassion that transcended the hateful act he had committed. David had not sought revenge, had not allowed personal feelings to cloud his professional judgment. He had acted with unwavering professionalism, his skill and expertise focused solely on saving Robert's life. The contrast between Robert's actions and David's response was stark and unsettling. Robert's actions had been fueled by hate. David's actions were driven by compassion. Robert had sought to inflict pain. David had sought to heal. Robert had acted out of prejudice. David had acted out of professionalism. The disparity was profound, a stark reminder of the chasm between Robert's hateful worldview and the reality of David's unwavering humanity. Robert began to understand the depth of his own failings, the ugliness of his prejudice. He had allowed his hatred to blind him, to cloud his judgment, to justify his violence. He had acted without thought, without empathy, without any consideration for the consequences of his actions. He had acted out of fear, a fear born of ignorance and fueled by prejudice. The irony of his situation was not lost on him. The man he had tried to harm was now the one responsible for saving his life. The man he had dehumanized was now showing him the very humanity he had denied him. The man he had sought to dominate was now in a position of power, his life literally in David's hands. The weight of this realization was profound, a heavy burden of guilt and regret. He had acted out of hate, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions, not in the form of retribution, but in the form of a profound and humbling lesson in humanity. Days blurred into a hazy montage of pain, medication, and the constant hum of hospital machinery. Robert's physical condition gradually improved, the acute pain receding, replaced by a dull ache and persistent fatigue. His mind, however, remained a battlefield of conflicting emotions: guilt, shame, regret, and a dawning understanding of the depth of his own prejudice. He had been given a second chance, a reprieve from the consequences of his actions, but the weight of his past actions continued to bear down on him. He watched David, observing the doctor's calm efficiency, the unwavering professionalism, the quiet dignity. The man he had so viciously attacked was now responsible for his very survival, a stark and unsettling reality that he couldn't ignore. The contrast between his own hateful actions and David's unwavering compassion was a constant source of torment. One afternoon, as David made his rounds, Robert mustered the courage to speak. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy and weak from disuse. David stopped beside his bed, his expression neutral, his gaze steady and unwavering. He waited patiently, giving Robert the space and time he needed. "Doctor," Robert began, his voice barely a whisper, the words catching in his throat. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a mixture of shame and fear. He hadn't spoken much since the accident, his thoughts a jumbled mess of regret and self-recrimination. "Yes," David responded, his voice calm and reassuring, his tone professional yet empathetic. He didn't show any sign of recognition, any hint of anger or resentment. He simply waited, his expression patient and understanding. Robert hesitated, struggling to find the right words. The question he wanted to ask felt monumental, laden with the weight of his past actions and the profound implications of David's unexpected compassion. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the potential rejection, the possible scorn. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice trembling slightly. Why are you helping me? After what I did?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken guilt and the desperate hope for understanding. David listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush Robert, didn't offer any immediate answers. He simply waited, allowing Robert to fully express himself, to articulate the turmoil that had been consuming him. He gave Robert the space to confront his own actions, to acknowledge the depth of his wrongdoing. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions, a testament to the gravity of the situation and the profound implications of Robert's question. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a space where the weight of past actions and the potential for future redemption hung precariously in the balance. It was a moment of truth, a turning point in Robert's journey towards self-awareness and potential redemption. The answer, when it came, would be pivotal in shaping Robert's future. The question hung in the air, a silent plea for understanding and forgiveness. David remained silent for a moment, his gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't rush his answer, allowing the weight of Robert's question to hang in the air, a palpable testament to the gravity of the situation. He understood the depth of Robert's remorse, the genuine struggle for understanding that lay beneath the surface of his question. He knew that his response would be pivotal, not just in addressing Robert's immediate concerns, but also in shaping the trajectory of Robert's future. Then, in a calm, measured tone, David spoke. "My job," he began, his voice even and clear, "is to save lives. That's my oath, my commitment, my purpose. It doesn't matter who the patient is, what they've done, or what they believe. My responsibility is to provide the best possible medical care, to do everything in my power to ensure their survival." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. He looked at Robert, his expression conveying a quiet strength, a steadfast resolve. He wasn't offering an excuse or a justification for his actions. He was simply stating a fundamental truth, a core principle that guided his profession. "I don't condone your actions," David continued, his voice firm but gentle. "What you did was wrong, harmful, and inexcusable. But my personal feelings don't change my professional obligations. I'm not here to judge you, to punish you, or to seek retribution. I'm here to heal you, to restore your health, to give you the best possible chance of recovery." He spoke with a quiet authority, his words carrying the weight of his experience, his commitment, his unwavering belief in the sanctity of human life. He wasn't offering forgiveness. He was simply stating a fact, a fundamental truth that transcended personal feelings and prejudices. "The Hippocratic Oath," David continued, "is not just a set of words. It's a commitment, a promise to serve humanity, to alleviate suffering, to heal the sick, regardless of their background, their beliefs, or their past actions. That's what I've dedicated my life to, and that's what I'm doing here today." He looked at Robert, his gaze unwavering, his expression conveying a quiet strength, a steadfast resolve. He wasn't judging Robert. He was simply stating a fact, a fundamental principle that guided his actions. He was a doctor, and his job was to heal, to save lives, regardless of the circumstances. David's words were not a lecture or a condemnation. They were a simple statement of fact, a profound expression of his commitment to his profession and his unwavering belief in the sanctity of human life. They were a testament to the power of compassion, the ability to rise above personal animosity and focus on the well-being of another human being. They were a beacon of hope in the midst of darkness, a reminder of the enduring power of humanity. They were a message of hope, a testament to the possibility of redemption, a quiet affirmation of the resilience of the human spirit. They were a powerful statement, a silent rebuke of Robert's hatred, and a beacon of hope for his future. Alone in his hospital room, the silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the machines monitoring his vital signs. The physical pain had lessened, but a deeper, more profound ache lingered, the ache of guilt, shame, and self-recrimination. Robert lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events of the past few days, the images sharp and vivid, the emotions raw and intense. He thought about his attack on David, the senseless violence, the hateful words. He remembered the satisfaction he'd felt, the fleeting sense of power, the misplaced sense of superiority. Now, those feelings felt grotesque, a sickening reminder of his own failings. He had acted out of prejudice, out of ignorance, out of fear. He had allowed his hatred to consume him, blinding him to the humanity of the man he had attacked. He thought about David's response, the unwavering professionalism, the unexpected compassion. David hadn't sought revenge, hadn't expressed anger or resentment. He had simply done his job, providing the best possible medical care, regardless of Robert's past actions. This unexpected kindness was a profound shock, a stark contrast to the hatred Robert had unleashed. The contrast between his own actions and David's response was overwhelming. Robert's actions had been fueled by hate. David's actions had been driven by compassion. Robert had sought to inflict pain. David had sought to heal. Robert had acted out of prejudice. David had acted out of professionalism. The disparity was profound, a stark reminder of the chasm between his own hateful worldview and the reality of David's unwavering humanity. He thought about David's explanation, his commitment to his oath, his dedication to saving lives, regardless of personal feelings. Those words resonated deeply, striking a chord within Robert's soul. They were a powerful testament to the healing power of professionalism, the ability to transcend prejudice and focus on the well-being of another human being. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a crushing burden of guilt and regret. He had acted without thought, without empathy, without any consideration for the consequences of his actions. He had allowed his fear and prejudice to dictate his behavior, leading him down a path of violence and hatred. He realized the depth of his own ignorance, the blindness of his prejudice. He had judged David based on stereotypes, on assumptions on the color of his skin. He had failed to see David as a human being, as an individual with his own hopes, dreams, and aspirations. He had reduced David to a symbol, a caricature, a target for his own misplaced anger. He felt a profound sense of shame, a deep remorse for his actions. He had hurt another human being, had inflicted pain and suffering, had acted out of pure hatred. He had violated his own humanity, and in doing so, had diminished himself. He began to understand the profound impact of his actions, not just on David, but on himself. His prejudice had not only harmed David, but it had also poisoned his own soul. It had blinded him to the beauty and complexity of the human experience, had limited his ability to connect with others, had prevented him from experiencing the fullness of life. He knew he had a long road ahead, a difficult journey of self-reflection and change. He had to confront his prejudices, to understand the roots of his hatred, to learn to see the world through a different lens. He had to make amends, not just to David, but to himself. The journey would be challenging, but he was determined to embark on it, driven by a newfound understanding of his own humanity and a deep desire for redemption. The unexpected kindness of his victim had ignited a spark of hope within him, a glimmer of possibility for a new beginning. The hospital stay became a crucible, forging a profound shift in Robert's perspective. The physical healing was gradual, the lingering aches a constant reminder of the violence he had inflicted. But the deeper healing, the transformation of his inner self, was even more profound and transformative. The experience forced him to confront the ugliness of his own prejudices, the consequences of his actions, and the unexpected humanity of his victim. He spent hours in quiet reflection, dissecting his past actions, examining the roots of his hatred. He realized that his prejudice wasn't simply a matter of individual bias. It was a product of a lifetime of ingrained societal messages, of subtle and not so subtle reinforcement of stereotypes, of the normalization of discrimination. He recognized the insidious nature of prejudice, its ability to warp perceptions, to justify cruelty, and to dehumanize others. He began to confront the fear that had fueled his hatred. He realized that his aggression towards David stemmed from a deep-seated fear of difference, a fear of the unknown, a fear of losing his sense of place and belonging in a world that was becoming increasingly diverse. He had projected his own insecurities onto David, using him as a scapegoat for his own anxieties. He started to read, seeking out books and articles that challenged his preconceived notions, that broadened his understanding of different cultures and perspectives. He learned about the history of racism, the systemic inequalities that had perpetuated prejudice, and the ongoing struggle for social justice. He began to see the world through a different lens, recognizing the interconnectedness of humanity and the shared experiences that bound people together, regardless of their differences. He started to question his own beliefs, to challenge his assumptions, to confront the biases that had shaped his worldview. He realized that his prejudice had not only harmed David, but had also limited his own ability to experience the fullness of life, to connect with others, to appreciate the beauty and complexity of the human experience. He began to understand the importance of empathy, of seeing the world from another person's perspective. He realized that his actions had not only caused physical harm to David, but had also inflicted emotional pain, had violated David's sense of safety and security, had undermined David's dignity and worth. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, a constant reminder of the harm he had caused. But alongside the guilt and shame came a growing sense of responsibility, a determination to make amends, to use his experience to promote understanding and tolerance. He knew that his journey of transformation would be long and challenging, but he was committed to embarking on it, driven by a newfound understanding of his own humanity and a deep desire for redemption. He started small, engaging in conversations with people from different backgrounds, actively listening to their stories, challenging his own assumptions, and seeking to understand their perspectives. He began to reach out to organizations working to combat racism, offering his support and volunteering his time. He knew that his actions couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he hoped that they could contribute to a more just and equitable future. The experience had been a profound turning point, a catalyst for personal growth and social change. The incident had forced him to confront his prejudices, to acknowledge the consequences of his actions, and to embark on a journey of self-reflection and transformation. The path ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to walk it, driven by a newfound understanding of his own humanity and a deep desire for redemption. The day of Robert's discharge arrived, marked not by celebration, but by a quiet sense of anticipation and resolve. He was leaving the hospital a changed man, his physical wounds healed, but the scars on his soul still raw, yet strangely, a source of strength. The experience had been a crucible, forging within him a new understanding of himself, his prejudices, and his place in the world. He walked out of the hospital, the crisp autumn air a welcome contrast to the sterile environment he had inhabited for weeks. He took a deep breath, the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth filling his lungs, a grounding presence in the midst of his ongoing internal transformation. He felt a sense of liberation, not just from the physical confinement of the hospital, but from the mental and emotional constraints of his past prejudices. He had spent his time in the hospital not only recovering physically, but also engaging in extensive self-reflection. He had read widely, seeking to understand the roots of his prejudice, the systemic inequalities that had perpetuated discrimination, and the ongoing struggle for social justice. He had challenged his own assumptions, confronted his biases, and sought to understand the world from different perspectives. He had also spent time reflecting on David's actions, the unwavering professionalism and unexpected compassion that had profoundly impacted him. David's commitment to his oath, his dedication to saving lives regardless of personal feelings, had been a powerful lesson in humanity, a testament to the healing power of professionalism. It had shown Robert the possibility of redemption, the potential for growth, and the importance of empathy and understanding. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, he looked around, seeing the city with new eyes. The bustling streets, once a backdrop for his own arrogance and aggression, now seemed filled with a vibrant tapestry of humanity. He saw people of all races, ethnicities, and backgrounds, each with their own stories, their own struggles, their own dreams. He felt a sense of connection to them, a shared humanity that transcended differences. He knew that his journey of transformation was far from over. He had a long road ahead, a path of continuous self-reflection, learning, and growth. He had to actively work to dismantle the prejudices that had shaped his worldview, to challenge his own assumptions, and to seek to understand others. He had to make amends for the harm he had caused, not just to David, but to others who had been victims of his prejudice. He had already started reaching out to organizations working to combat racism, offering his support, and volunteering his time. He planned to use his experience to educate others, to promote understanding and tolerance, and to advocate for social justice. He knew that his actions couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he hoped that they could contribute to a more just and equitable future. He walked away from the hospital, not with a sense of closure, but with a sense of purpose, a commitment to living a life free of hatred and prejudice. He was a changed man, his past actions a constant reminder of the harm caused by intolerance, but his future a testament to the power of redemption and the enduring strength of the human spirit. He was embarking on a new beginning, a journey of self-discovery and social responsibility, driven by a newfound understanding of his own humanity and a deep desire to make amends for the harm he had caused. His journey was far from over, but he was committed to walking it, one step at a time, striving to live a life that reflected the compassion and understanding he had been shown.